getting out than it was to get in. Deliver us from evil, forgive me my sins. Everything in here's either blue, orange, or gray. I'm counting the hours until visiting day. It's crazy in here. Some days I just sit in the fire. There's nothing around me but concrete and barbed wire. Everything in here is either blue, orange, or gray. And count the hours until visiting day. Before I forget what I've learned here, before I forget what I'm grateful for, turnpike overpass, highway line.
Here we go. Every once in a while you write something that I feel reluctant to take ownership of. And I felt that way over the song many years ago over Leaving Vegas. I felt that way with You Rock, We Roll. And I felt that way with Visiting Day. And I think Visiting Day for a slightly different reason, in that it's casting me in the first person. And I hadn't done a lot of that, you know.
Hope it's easier getting out than it was to get in.
It was based on basically years of letter writing. I tried to keep it honest and clear, which I think for the most part I did. But I also, I didn't want it to be heavy or preachy or trying to convince you of it. I just wanted it to be a simple thing, you know, that is that, you know. Some young kid writing his older cousin that ended up in prison for life. My cousin Patrick came to stay with us in the late 80s. He was my dad's brother's son. I seem to remember him like taking a Greyhound, and when we went to pick him up, he was actually in the baggage compartment of the thing. Like, he didn't have a ticket. He crawled out of where they have the luggage.
I said to Darlene, I said, I'm going to ask you an awful lot on this, but I would like to give him a home and kind of see if we can kind of get him back to where he enjoys life. And that was our intent. It was a massive task because he had a lot of baggage at the time.
It was a pretty bumpy road growing up. You know, we weren't rich, but you know, we had a big family, 5 kids. We grew up in Cabbagetown, downtown Toronto, and then we moved to Nova Scotia. From there, our parents died, and we got shuffled around, and essentially I went to a group home.
She sadly took her own life and left 5 kids.
And so did he, so did Dave.
Mm-hmm.
So
it was
these
a
kids,
tragedy all the way around.
they ran away from their foster homes. They ended up on the streets. And I think Patrick was maybe, I'm guessing here, maybe 8 or 10 at the time.
Yeah.
They really didn't have a chance.
My brother seemed to be always getting in trouble with the law from an early age. I recall a couple incidents, break and enter. I think we robbed a bank, tried to anyway, when I was 5 years old. And apparently we didn't get away with it. I don't remember too much about it, but my grandmother still had the starter pistol that we used.
And then fast forward 2 years later, and Patrick came out to see us. And that was when Scott first met Patrick.
He used to pick me up on this old 10-speed my dad had. He picked me up at school, and we used to ride around, Assiniboine Forest, Assiniboine Park. So we kind of just went on little adventures, you know, and we used to make up little songs as we rode along, like stupid songs like Kentucky Fried Frog Legs, and little silly things. He was more like a big brother to me than a cousin. To me, it was like I was having the time of my life. I was too young to be aware of anything else that was going on. I think back to it, I think it was probably just as new and exciting to him as it was to me. We seemed perfect to him, to the point where he started working himself over like he didn't deserve to be there. He was conning us, you know, he didn't fit in this picture. And it was kind of broke my heart a little bit when I realized that it was that tough. Eventually
he left and cleaned us out of whatever he could find. I know he took cameras, and he took some of Barry's clothes, and just took off and left.
He snuck away and started making his way toward California. And from what I've understood of the story, as I've kind of done my own research over the years, he met this man hitchhiking. This man would have picked him up and invited him to stay in his home in San Clemente. And I don't know why it happened that way, but at some point after staying with him, there was an altercation and a fight that ultimately led to this man's death.
There's no point in hiding or glorifying anything. When you're in the drug world and you get money any which way you can, and with Patrick, it was strolling the gay scene in San Francisco, and that's how the story, I think, come to truism, is he beat the man to death. And Scott and I have had many conversations over the years over this, and Scott was instantly forgiving, where I'm not.
The whole family was, totally taken back, I guess. He's always been in trouble, but never anything extreme as that. So he called my grandmother, and she cried and begged him to turn himself in, and so he did so, and therefore he didn't get the death penalty, but he actually was on death row for 2 years before they concluded that they weren't going to kill him.
He went into the system up there, I think, at about 20. I have a photo from when he was kind of taken into county, and it said 1989. He went into Old Folsom first, and I believe is where they transferred him. It was the first prison he kind of occupied, and from there, years later, he was moved over to New Folsom.
I know when he went to prison, he was a big, tough guy. But when he came to see us, he was just a kid. He was just a regular, roughly 18-year-old kid, who had certainly had a really difficult life, but he was just a regular kid. So what happened in the years between then and when they ended up in jail for murder, I don't know.
An Indian summer, Oklahoma sunset. Well, there's a nicer place. I haven't been there yet.
I read on, maybe it was Facebook, my friend Linda McRae, songwriter friend of mine. She just finished her first or second songwriting workshop in Folsom Prison. I was surprised to see that she was in that particular prison, and so I think I sent her a note or a phone message just asking her to say hello to certain people. And it just surprised her, She's like, "Boy, how do you know these guys?" And so I wrote her back and explained the story. And so it kind of quickly turned into an invitation. And I've thought about doing this sort of thing for a long time. And I'm excited and nervous. I've played some tough gigs. I don't really know what to expect out of this one.
It's funny to hear my mom say, "Do you have the letter from the warden?" How many times will that come up in life?
If anything, I kind of wish my cousin was around to be there, but You know, I'm excited to meet essentially what was his family for the last years of his life. First song that I wrote that I did anything with would have been a song called Leaving Vegas. And considering it, you know, my first kind of real song in my early 20s, and it was about an experience I had in my Leader House days. We played Las Vegas.
Left his mama a letter saying you're pretty proud of your son.
I'd written that song while traveling, so, you know, that was kind of the point where I realized motion and minor chaos worked really well for me in the process. Well, I keep looking at this page and nothing's happening.
No? Well,
It's because I'm sitting still.
it's because you're trying too hard. Maybe we need to be driving.
Really, I'm just nervous about the whole customs deal. I think about all these ways to deliver the truth. Why? I don't know why I do that to myself. Why not just tell the truth? I mean, I'd had trouble, you know, between 15, 19, somewhere in there. You know, at 16, I'd left home for a while. And I had lived with a friend on an apartment on Holmes Street. You know, it was a real change from Charleswood. And at 16, I'd gotten into trouble with drugs and money and debt and all sorts of stuff. And we wound up getting in over our heads. And you know, by the end there were bikers kind of involved. And it's like, geez, you know, we're lucky we didn't get killed, let alone go to prison. But it was humbling to me. Just being in holding for any length of time was not pleasant, and it injected just enough clarity into my life that I realized, hey, this is not my world. I don't want to do this. The one constant I had through all these things was my cousin, and you know, I wrote to him before I went to rehab at 16. I wrote to him immediately after I ran away from the place, and you know, when I was going in, he didn't judge me or discourage me. But when I wrote him after I'd ran away, he said, "Yeah, I had a feeling you would, and there's no shame in that. Keep your head up in that rehab joint. At 17, I bet you will not be too thrilled with it. But make the most of it if you really want to kick the habit. A program only offers an opportunity. The real work falls on you, whether you have the strength to or not. You are a Nolan. That says to me that you are strong. Take the time to work on your music. That's my favorite part."
Oh, how'd it go?
Well, this lady was like my mom. Yeah. I said to Rachel, I'm like, as soon as I looked in her eyes, I thought, okay, we got a clear playing field here. I talk about the song Leaving Vegas and considering it my first kind of real song. But the truth is almost in some ways block out that I was writing from probably 11 or 12. And it was most definitely my cousin Pat that brought it into focus for me. And he started sending me poetry, and he sent me, he stole a book from the prison library. It was funny because I played in that very library and I looked through the bookshelves, and I never told anybody, but my cousin would swipe books out of there and send them to me. You know, it was an education for me. He exposed me to a variety of different writers, and he was the first person to really expose me to poetry.
He had a huge influence on Scott's life, even though he didn't see very much of him. At an age when Scott was, 17, 18, going through difficult times himself, those letters he wrote to Scott were absolutely amazing to me. How he could make him understand, whereas a parent couldn't.
I knew he wanted to see me, and he had sent me a couple visiting applications and stuff. But, I was not living well. I couldn't make the trip financially. I didn't have any kind of independent means to do anything like that. I kind of regret it, I wished I wasn't in that. I wish I was in the position I'm in now. But so, you know, that's always weighed on me a little bit. So yeah, going to Folsom was that last visit that I never got to make. Just before we go to Folsom, we're going to stop and visit my good friend Jesse DiNatale. He's one of my artist friends that I will often go to with questions or looking for advice. I find I get such strong energy and very often very inspired just from spending a bit of time in Jesse's company that I thought it would be a good thing for me to do before I participated in Arts and Corrections.
Well, it's crazy in here. Some days I just sit in the fire with nothing around me but concrete and barbed wire. Everything in here is either blue, orange, or gray, and I'm counting the hours until visiting day. Something like that. Still missing a verse.
I'm unclear as whether or not you're the prisoner or the person who's written a letter.
The last line was, and I too look forward to visiting day.
Right.
So that was what I figured would be, you know, they didn't have it by there then.
Well, it could be a little clearer. Just put that note that some sort of reflection that you've just read the letter.
When I'm writing something, I always have that desire to chase it down, and I think a part of me is not feeling that because I'd be interested in my cousin's friend in there. I've heard a bit of his songs, and he's a real good writer. So I thought, you know, in the event that something could happen in a collaborative way, I could go in with the feeling like I have something to start with, and leave it kind of open and loose, and just to see, you know, you never know.
I need to have something of me that's going on within the song. And even if it's a song about someone else or some other situation, usually I'll want some real life experience so that when I go and sit down and have to sing this, I can sing it as truly that I have experienced this, you know, in some way. And because ultimately, I think the only reason I write is so that I can sing like that.
Fire in the scene in the backyard light, oh the backyard light, oh the lullaby. Water trickles from an empty lot, and it's all we got, yeah it's all we got. An iron and stone, your sad trombone, your leather shoes and your ivory comb. All our bags are packed like a burglar. It's just me and her who will lead you down the road.
Right at Flags. Be here?
Right, yeah, I remember this part. Folsom Street Prison. You know, I was nervous. I mean, when I got to the first of a series of checkpoints, I kept going through and the alarms kept going off, and it's because of my rings. And Jim pokes his head around this corner and says, "Try walking sideways." So I turn and I kind of shimmy in, and sure enough, and me and this one guard and Jim were all laughing hysterically. It's like, it was pretty light, all things considered. But then after that check stop, the second one, that one was a little more serious in that that's when the claustrophobia and okay, I'm in here, you know, like I gotta get out for a second, open the door and leave like that. There's a process now to getting back out. So that, you know, my temperament changed a little bit. One thing that was really distinct that I still think about regularly is these intercoms in there. I'd said a number of times to guards, are these designed to have you on edge? Because there's constantly information coming out of them, but none of it was legible to me. when you arrive as an inmate, as a new inmate, one of the things you're given in your, you get like a couple pairs of underwear, a couple pairs of socks, your jumpsuit. They give you earplugs. And it's like, I don't know how you'd sleep. I don't know how you'd write poetry or song lyrics. I mean, it's all too much. When he first arrived at Folsom is I think probably true with a lot of people, in that your options for gangs and community and kind of stuff are largely predetermined by race. And he was kind of tasked with stabbing another inmate or taking out another inmate that was a sex offender of some kind. And, from what he told me, it was 2 years of solitary confinement that led him to the soul searching, and he went in there very bitter and kind of betrayed by the gangs that he had grown to believe, were kind of his family, and once that set in, the reality that he'd taken a life landed on him like a ton of bricks. And he became determined he knew that he couldn't give that life back. So that was really the core, that's what motivated everything that he did, was he was determined to live the remainder of his years trying to do something useful and meaningful with what life he had left.
He started reading poetry, he began to look at poetry, and he was reading that, and then he began to write, and somehow the influence of the poetry and his own creativity and looking within himself to write honest poetry began to make the shift for him. Patrick is, I kind of refer to him as a big part of the California State Prison inmate mythology. He's sort of a bit of a legend, he's a bit of a myth, and guys that don't know him. But one thing that Patrick did very significantly is he was the inmate component that started a men's movement, a men's group called the Inside Circle.
It was just a group of men that got together to share, which I'm sure is unusual for men, especially men in prison, to share their feelings, to share their thoughts, to share their poetry, to share their music. It was just an outlet for men, and Patrick was really instrumental in this happening.
And this poem is called Gangster to Gangster. My appreciation for Jim for making this possible and bringing me in, and everybody else when I got here that showed me love. I have a family outside of my family. They call us gangsters, and it was on from the jump. Craving love and attention that I didn't receive at home. Yeah, drug addict parents, I forgive them. I just gotta do my own.
The first poem I want to do for you is called No Beauty in Cell Bars. No beauty in cell bars. Restless, unable to sleep. The keys, bars, the guns being racked. Year after year, endless echoes of steel kissing steel. Noise, constant yelling, nothing said. Vegetating faces, lost faces, dusted faces. A lifer, a dreamer. Tomorrow's a dream, yesterday's a memory. Both the passing of a cloud.
My cousin and Spoon Jackson were among the first people that kind of openly and boldly defied the racial segregation. They used to walk the yard together as a African-American man and a white man, and it had never happened. I mean, the old prison was built in the late 1800s.
In a very racially charged environment, my room had all the races working together, and the art was the conduit for communication and appreciation and respect. And that was kind of Pat's legacy. That was his inspiration to guys.
So why don't we, are we rolling? Oh, we're rolling, okay. Hi, I'm Jim Carlson, and this is the Creative Arts Program Studio, and today we're real pleased to have Scott Nolan from Canada here. He's a singer-songwriter. So without further ado, we're just going to turn it over to you guys. I hope you just enjoy talking with each other, sharing songs, and spending your time together.
One of the people I'll get to meet is a man named Marty Williams, who was a long-time cellmate of my cousin's. Pat had mentioned him to me in his letters, talking about what a great songwriter and musician he was, and I got the distinct impression that Marty was also a real influence on my cousin in terms of music and spoken word, and they clearly just had a real, genuine friendship.
She was sweet as summer
I could have had love. I could have had love. But I chose these trains. These oh God, these chains. And I could be flying with the eagles or running with the wolves if it weren't for these, except for these, if it weren't for these.
If the idea of writing and creative writing is, you know, about making yourself available, which I really believe it is, there's very few people that are more available than those that have kind of had everything taken away.
Everybody who comes in and interacts with the inmates gets hooked because there's an intensity, there's a real sense that art is life. It's not a hobby, it's not something you do on Fridays if you're good all week. It is their life, and it's their lifeline to sanity, it's their lifeline to themselves, it's their lifeline to each other.
And I could be flying with the eagles or running with the wolves. If it weren't for these, except for these.
Awesome song. The writing workshop was, I've never experienced anything like it. This elderly man in poor health, and he offered a couple disclaimers that he doesn't have much lung capacity and he's not a very good singer, and he's had a number of different people sing his songs from over the years, and what he played and sang, and not once, like every time it was his turn, left me in shock.
First time I saw her, she took my heart away. You know, I've been in love with her ever since that day. But when I told her what she did to me, she just smiled and said, baby, c'est la vie.
I expected good songs, and I expected the odd guy that would have a big voice, or maybe I expected one guy that would be a good guitar player. I don't know that I expected to go in and be so completely and utterly blown away by the writing.
I'll play this, Jim's heard this a million times, I don't care. This is a Pat song. This is how I work through it. And this was supposed to be about Pat, and then it was sort of like to Pat. So I hope you see that.
Carlson, who runs Arts and Corrections, he's become very close. He was very close with my cousin Pat, but became very close with Marty over the years too. So outside of the concerts and the workshops, he really wanted me to get to spend time directly with Marty, which is not allowed. pretty amazing experience to be able to spend time with this man that I'd heard about as a little kid, you know, but only ever as Marty. And it was a real kick to be able to sit with Marty and laugh about these stories and tell him about these letters, and to get to hear his first-hand accounts.
All of the times I needed your blessing. 2 weeks we spent raising the sheep. Down on my knees, but never confessing. That I was the one refusing to heal. People who've had it easy all their lives do not become poets.
Yeah.
And they don't become musicians, they don't become writers. They can become people who play instruments, you know, and they can read music, and anybody can learn how to do that, just like anybody can learn how to touch type. But to really be somebody who writes, and really be somebody who paints, or somebody who creates, takes a certain level of relationship with real life, with pain, with loss, with grief, and we don't have to call it those things, we don't have to sit around in a circle and talk about them, but the very fact that they exist, and that's sort of where we write from. We can't write real stuff unless we live real life.
I've often made that reference, and people say, wow, why do you do what I do? I jokingly say it's my sickness. And I say jokingly because I take it as a real blessing. I don't mean to make light of it, but there is that part of it. I started writing stuff before I left from things he shared in his letters. Some of them were his words, maybe slightly changed. Some of them were his words completely. And I started writing the song, and I really liked it. And then I realized, well, I'm writing from a perspective that I don't really know, and I started questioning myself whether that was my place to do that. So to solve that crisis for myself, I started writing another verse that was as if we were writing letters, you know, which was kind of what the whole thing was based around. And I don't really know that it's finished. I don't know that I'll play it regularly, but seeing as you just played that song, I'll give it a try.
I hope it's easier getting out than it was to get in. Deliver us from evil, forgive me my sins. Everything here is either blue, orange, or gray. And I'm counting the hours until visiting day. I just got your letter, and I'm an uncle, you say. Funny sometimes how the years slip away. When he grows up, he starts asking for me. Just tell him my ship was lost out at sea. Well, it's crazy in here. Some days I just sit in the fire with nothing around me but concrete and barbed wire. I'm up for parole come 2012. They could give me my freedom, I still have to live with myself.
You know, you say you hope that you left something there. I was looking around, I was watching the group, and everybody in there to a man was someplace other than, you know, prison today.
I think the thing that really hit me the most was I saw humanity in there. Like, I thought a lot about Pat. I've dreamt that building. I've imagined where he slept. I saw signs and markings in there today that reminded me of the stamps on the envelopes that I got. And I said to Rachel in the van, I said, you know, I've walked through there now And it feels like peace and closure. I got letters from him after he was moved. There's a prison hospital called Vacaville in the town Vacaville. I think by then it was like stage 3 or maybe even 4 cirrhosis of the liver. There were some procedures after he got quite sick. And my understanding is that it's crude. It's very minimal health care. They would kind of open up his stomach to basically cauterized wounds to stop bleeds. There was no repairing anything. Apparently it was my cousin's choosing to deny treatment very early on. And he had said to somebody, maybe it was Jim, I don't recall, that, my whole life I've dove in head first, When things get so tense to where I couldn't stand them, he would, what he called sitting in the fire. He would just put himself in the center of it. And that became a real mantra, a real philosophy to him. But yeah, it's a terrible feeling, imagining somebody you love being, dying alone, in a really ugly place, and in a very unpeaceful way, So, but my cousin was a very tough man, and I believe he could handle that better than most.
When my friend Pat Nolan passed away in 2000, I wrote a series of poems. Squat monoliths stare unmoving beneath the rolling gray. The b-ball courts dark from last night's rain. Steel mouths gape and spew humanity into a shallow basin to endlessly walk a warped asphalt track around and around and around, like Ixion to the wheel, like clockwork gears, like a snake devouring itself. And one might have been born to old pale prisons of hand-hewn granite bone, full of faces, full of ghosts, full of straight black bars, to the jangle of keys, to the night cries, to where only the fittest survive, and there's never a question of where you're at. And then one day it's squat monoliths in a big warped wheel, and somebody stands among the orbiting flesh and says, "Where are we going?"
So before we head back, we're gonna stop and visit a gentleman named Don Morrison, who was a writer and a poet. That helped my cousin start these men's groups in the prison. He became very close with my cousin. Eventually, my cousin named him the executor of his literary estate, and any of his published writing and unpublished writing. There's Marty.
Marty. I believe that's Lyle Nooner. That's Patrick.
He's always got that head tilt and that kind of look.
In late '99, they shipped him off down to the prison hospital in Vacaville, and he was only there 6 or 8 months before he passed. But one of the things I asked him, I said, "So when you're gone," because we knew it was terminal, I said, "What do you want?" He says, "I'd really like to be buried with my people in Nova Scotia." And so I went up and then rented a car and hooked up with one of his sisters. And she drove me out to the home that the family had lived in, and was in all his early poetry. Beth, his sister, said, "We want to gather the family and have an official service." So I handed her the box of ashes in it. And I said goodbye, but I got his ashes returned. And just talking to Scott, he says the sisters tell him that they still haven't had that service, but I think this is going to be an impetus for him to push a little bit and get them all out there.
I never thought I was making this visit for any sense of closure, but it really kind of had that effect. I mean, it was amazing to have men come up to me in there. A number of guys said, "Your cousin saved my life." Another man tell me, your cousin was a poet warrior.
No, he left a real impact in the world for all of his short life.
When he came out of solitary confinement, very determined to thumb his nose at that life and kind of go a different way. It was his reputation before solitary that kind of gave him a bit of a ground to stand on. Jim had told me later on, your cousin and even Marty and a number of these guys in the program, if they were moved to any other prisons in America, I mean, they have death sentences on their heads. It's one thing to mind your own business and do your time maybe, but it's another to be a part of these groups and to work with other races. You know, it's against some sort of prison mandated law. Even when I was visiting all these years later, the guys that are in these programs and trying to live a more positive life, you know, it's not easy. I'd have to say the biggest thing that stayed with me from being in there is how few of the men, particularly that I had direct one-on-one conversations with, were men of the sort that I couldn't imagine myself just sitting and having a beer or a conversation with in the free world. That's a hard thing to shake, and I don't think it's unique in me. I think more people than not in my situation would come away feeling that too, like, boy, these are human beings. We have to reconcile that, you know. Everybody in their own individual way, at some point in their lifetime, will very likely have to kind of reconcile that for themselves.
I've spent 20 years going into that place, and it's not a life that I could easily imagine. Let me give you a little poem that Patrick wrote that touches on this exact theme. It's called "Were I a Wolf." Were I a wolf, my padded paws would pummel with urgent rhythmic rise this primal lament that invades my heart.
Against the night's moist, mossy carpet, till I broke free from the forest's dark, foreboding depths to the timberline, and, with one ferocious, mournful note, let rip this anguish from outstretched throat. If only I were a wolf, and not this pathetic creature called man, whose broken, gnarled teeth snap closed to grief, too choked by terror of these deep-chested, guttural emotions that would devour me whole if I suddenly let go. If only I were a wolf.
Hope it's easier getting out than it was to get in. Deliver us from evil, forgive me my sins. Everything in here is either blue, orange, or gray, and I'm counting the hours until visiting day. I just got your letter. I'm an uncle, you say. Funny sometimes how the years slip away. When he grows up, starts asking for me, just tell him my ship was lost out at sea. It's crazy in here. Some days I just sit in the fire with nothing around me, concrete and barbed wire. Everything in here is either blue, orange, or gray, and I too look forward to visiting